Commander Robert Tilburn stood on the bridge of HMS King George V at 10:36 a.m. on May 27, 1941, watching the German battleship Bismarck burn on the horizon. After 90 minutes of continuous bombardment, the most powerful warship ever built by Nazi Germany was dying. Her guns were silent, her superstructure ablaze, her hull shattered by hundreds of shell impacts. British ships had fired over 2,800 shells at point-blank range. Torpedoes from HMS Dorsetshire were delivering the final blows. Within minutes, Bismarck would slip beneath the Atlantic waves, taking 2,000 German sailors with her. Tilburn should have felt triumph. The Royal Navy had just won one of the most dramatic naval chases in history. Bismarck had sunk HMS Hood 3 days earlier, killing 1,415 British sailors in less than 6 minutes. Now she was paying for that victory with her own destruction. The threat was eliminated. The Atlantic shipping lanes were safe again. Britain had demonstrated that no German surface ship, no matter how powerful, could survive against the combined might of the Royal Navy. But as Tilburn watched Bismarck's final moments, a different thought began forming in his mind, one that would haunt him for months. What if they had just made a terrible mistake? What if destroying Bismarck wasn't actually a victory at all, but the catalyst for something far worse? The hunt for Bismarck had consumed the Royal Navy for 8 days. On May 18th, British intelligence confirmed that Germany's newest battleship had left Gotenhafen in occupied Poland, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. Their mission was commerce raiding, attacking the convoys that kept Britain supplied with food, fuel and weapons from North America. If Bismarck reached the Atlantic shipping lanes, she could devastate merchant traffic for months. The Royal Navy deployed every available capital ship to intercept her. HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales engaged Bismarck in the Denmark Strait on May 24th. The battle lasted 20 minutes. Hood exploded from a magazine detonation, breaking in half and sinking in 3 minutes. Only 3 survivors from a crew of 1,418. Prince of Wales was damaged and forced to retreat. Bismarck escaped into the Atlantic with minor damage. Britain was stunned. Hood had been the pride of the Royal Navy, the most famous warship in the world. Her destruction shook British confidence and terrified merchant sailors crossing the Atlantic. If Bismarck could destroy Hood so easily, what chance did cargo ships have? Admiral John Tovey, commanding the home fleet from HMS King George V, made the decision that would define the next 72 hours. Bismarck had to be found and destroyed, regardless of cost. Every available ship was diverted to the hunt. The chase became an obsession. Aircraft from HMS Victorious attacked Bismarck with torpedoes on the night of May 24th, scoring 1 hit that caused minor damage. But Bismarck's captain, Ernst Lindemann, was heading for occupied France. If he reached Brest, Bismarck could repair, refuel, and return to raiding. The Royal Navy was running out of time and fuel. On May 26th, a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck 690 miles from Brest. She was within range of German air cover by the next morning. Admiral Tovey ordered a desperate gambit. Torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal would attack at maximum range in deteriorating weather. It was Britain's last chance. At 9 p.m. 15 Swordfish biplanes took off in heavy seas and failing light. They found Bismarck and attacked through intense anti-aircraft fire. Most torpedoes missed, but one hit Bismarck's stern, jamming her rudder 12 degrees to port. That single torpedo doomed Bismarck. With her rudder jammed, she could only steam in circles. Repair crews worked through the night but couldn't fix the damage. By dawn on May 27th, Bismarck was wallowing in heavy seas, unable to maneuver, with British battleships closing fast. Captain Lindemann knew his ship was finished. He sent a final message to German Naval Command: "Ship unmanageable. We shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." HMS King George V and HMS Rodney opened fire at 8:47 a.m. from 23,000 yards. Their first salvos straddled Bismarck. Within minutes they found the range. 16-inch shells from Rodney smashed through Bismarck's armor. 14-inch shells from King George V ripped apart her superstructure. Bismarck tried to return fire, but British shells destroyed her forward turrets within 30 minutes. Her rear turrets fired a few more salvos before they too were silenced. The bombardment was methodical and brutal. British ships closed to 3,000 yards, point-blank range for battleship guns. They fired until their magazines ran low. Bismarck was a burning wreck, her decks covered with dead and dying sailors, her hull riddled with hundreds of holes. But she wouldn't sink. German engineering had created a ship that could absorb incredible punishment. Even gutted and ablaze, Bismarck remained afloat. Admiral Tovey ordered HMS Dorsetshire to finish her with torpedoes. The cruiser fired 3 torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side, then circled and fired 1 into her port side. At 10:39 a.m., Bismarck rolled over and sank stern first. The cold Atlantic water swallowed her in minutes. Of 2,221 men aboard, only 115 survived. Dorsetshire and HMS Marori picked up survivors until U-boat warnings forced them to abandon the rescue. Hundreds of German sailors were left floating in the water, dying from hypothermia. Commander Tilburn watched Bismarck disappear beneath the waves. Around him on King George V's bridge, officers were celebrating. They had avenged Hood. They had eliminated Germany's most dangerous surface raider. The victory was complete. But Tilburn wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about what happened next. Germany had started the war with a small surface fleet, 2 battleships, Bismarck and Tirpitz, 3 pocket battleships, several heavy cruisers. It wasn't enough to challenge the Royal Navy directly, but it was sufficient to threaten Atlantic convoys if deployed carefully. Hitler's strategy had been to use these ships as raiders, forcing Britain to divert resources protecting merchant shipping. Now Bismarck was gone. Prince Eugen had escaped to Brest but was damaged and trapped by British bombers. The pocket battleship Graf Spee had been scuttled in 1939. The capital ships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were under repair. Germany's surface fleet was functionally destroyed as an offensive force, which meant Hitler would have to rely entirely on U-boats. That realization hit Tilburn like a physical blow. For 2 years, the Battle of the Atlantic had been a two-front struggle. Surface raiders forced the Royal Navy to escort convoys with battleships and cruisers. U-boats attacked the convoys themselves. Britain's resources were stretched thin, fighting both threats simultaneously. By destroying Bismarck, the Royal Navy had eliminated the surface raider threat, but that didn't reduce Germany's overall naval capacity. It just concentrated it entirely on submarine warfare. Every resource Hitler had allocated to building and maintaining battleships could now be redirected to U-boat construction. Every skilled naval officer who might have commanded surface ships would now command submarines. Germany's entire naval strategy would pivot to unrestricted submarine warfare, and U-boats were far more dangerous than battleships. Tilburn had studied the numbers. Germany was commissioning new U-boats at an accelerating rate. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, had argued for years that submarines were Germany's best weapon against British shipping. Hitler had resisted, preferring the prestige of battleships. But with Bismarck sunk and the surface fleet neutralized, Dönitz would finally get the resources and freedom to wage total submarine warfare. The implications were terrifying. A single battleship like Bismarck could sink dozens of merchant ships, but she was vulnerable to air attack, required constant refueling, and could be tracked by intelligence. U-boats operated in wolf packs, attacking at night from underwater, virtually invisible until they struck. They required no ports except for resupply. They could operate continuously across the entire Atlantic. Britain was already losing the submarine war. In March 1941, U-boats had sunk 243,000 tons of shipping. In April, 249,000 tons. In May, 325,000 tons. Merchant ships were being destroyed faster than they could be built. If Germany expanded U-boat production and tactics, if every resource previously allocated to surface ships was redirected to submarines, Britain faced potential starvation within a year. Tilburn wasn't alone in this assessment. Captain Wilfred Patterson, King George V's commanding officer, had reached the same conclusion. As the crew celebrated Bismarck's sinking, Patterson pulled Tilburn aside. His expression was grim. "We've just handed Dönitz exactly what he wanted," Patterson said quietly. "No more competing with the surface fleet for resources, no more split priorities, just U-boats, hundreds of them, and all of Hitler's attention." The conversation was brief, but it crystallized something both officers had been thinking. The Royal Navy had won a tactical victory by sinking Bismarck, but strategically, they might have just accelerated Britain's defeat. Germany's surface fleet had been a manageable threat, powerful but limited. The U-boat fleet was unlimited, expandable, and far harder to counter. Within weeks, Tilburn's fears began materializing. German naval strategy shifted dramatically after Bismarck's loss. Hitler, who had prided himself on Germany's battleships, was furious about Bismarck's destruction. He blamed Admiral Erich Raeder, commander of the Kriegsmarine, for wasting resources on vulnerable surface ships. In meetings with naval commanders, Hitler increasingly sided with Dönitz, who argued that U-boats were Germany's only viable naval weapon. Resources flowed to submarine production. Shipyards that had been building destroyers and cruisers were converted to U-boat construction. By late 1941, Germany was commissioning 20 U-boats monthly, double the rate from early in the year. Dönitz's wolfpack tactics became more sophisticated. U-boats began operating in coordinated groups of 10 to 20 submarines, overwhelming convoy escorts through sheer numbers. The sinking statistics told a devastating story. June 1941, 310,000 tons of Allied shipping destroyed. July, 120,000 tons, August, 130,000 tons. The numbers seemed to drop after Bismarck sinking, but that was deceptive. U-boats were being repositioned, new tactics were being tested, production was ramping up. The real onslaught was coming. By early 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic reached crisis levels. In January, U-boats sank 327,000 tons. In February, 476,000 tons. Germany was destroying Allied shipping faster than it could possibly be replaced. Britain's food imports dropped by 1/3. Fuel rationing became severe. The island nation was slowly being strangled. Commander Tilburn, now promoted to captain and assigned to Western Approaches Command, watched the disaster unfold from Liverpool. His job was coordinating convoy protection, and he was losing. There weren't enough escort ships. Radar was primitive. Long-range aircraft coverage had massive gaps. U-boats attacked in those gaps, where convoys were undefended, sinking ships with impunity. The numbers haunted him. In 1942, U-boats would sink 1,160 Allied ships, totaling 6.2 million tons. That was more tonnage than the entire Royal Navy displaced. Germany was winning the Battle of the Atlantic through submarine warfare, exactly as Tilburn had feared when he watched Bismarck sink 18 months earlier. The connection wasn't lost on British naval intelligence. Reports analysing Germany's naval strategy noted the shift after Bismarck's destruction. With surface raiders eliminated, Hitler had authorised unprecedented U-boat expansion. Dönitz had 237 operational U-boats by mid-1942, with 181 more under construction. The Kriegsmarine was becoming a purely submarine force, and it was devastatingly effective. What made it worse was knowing the Royal Navy had enabled this shift. By hunting down and destroying Bismarck and the other surface raiders, Britain had inadvertently streamlined Germany's naval strategy. Hitler no longer had to divide resources between battleships and submarines. The decision was made for him by British torpedoes and shells. Germany's naval power was now concentrated entirely on the one weapon Britain struggled most to counter. Captain Tilburn discussed this with colleagues during rare moments away from operational duties. Some argued that Bismarck had to be destroyed regardless of consequences. She was too dangerous to leave operational. Others admitted the strategic blunder but insisted there had been no alternative. A few, late at night over whiskey in Liverpool's underground command centre, acknowledged the terrible irony. The Royal Navy's greatest victory of 1941 had set the stage for its near defeat in 1942. The turning point came slowly and at enormous cost. Improved radar, more escort carriers, long-range B-24 Liberator aircraft closing the mid-Atlantic gap, better depth charges, and breaking German naval codes. By May 1943, Allied defences had evolved enough to inflict unacceptable losses on U-boat wolf packs. Dönitz was forced to withdraw submarines from the North Atlantic. The Battle of the Atlantic turned in Britain's favour, but the victory came after 2 years of near-catastrophic losses. 2,603 Allied merchant ships sunk, totalling 13.5 million tons, 175 Allied warships destroyed, tens of thousands of merchant sailors dead. Britain had come within months of starvation multiple times. The United States had been forced to build merchant ships faster than Germany could sink them, a brutal mathematics of industrial capacity. All because U-boats, not battleships, were Germany's true naval weapon, and the Royal Navy had helped Hitler realise that by eliminating the surface fleet. After the war, Captain Tilburn wrote a classified analysis for the Admiralty, examining the strategic consequences of hunting surface raiders. His conclusion was uncomfortable. The Royal Navy had been correct to eliminate threats like Bismarck, but naval strategists had failed to consider second-order effects. Removing Germany's surface fleet didn't reduce the naval threat to Britain. It concentrated that threat into submarines, which proved far more dangerous. The report recommended that future naval strategy account for how enemy forces might adapt when one capability is neutralized. Destroying an opponent's preferred weapon might force them toward a more effective alternative. The lesson was learned at the cost of thousands of lives and millions of tons of shipping. Bismarck's sinking on May 27, 1941 was celebrated as a great British victory, and tactically it was. The Royal Navy had demonstrated its ability to hunt down and destroy any German surface ship regardless of power or armour. But strategically, watching Bismarck slip beneath the Atlantic waves marked the moment when Germany's naval war shifted entirely to submarines, the very shift that nearly starved Britain into surrender. Commander Robert Tilburn had seen it coming in those first moments after Bismarck sank. Standing on King George V's bridge, watching the oil-slicked water where the German battleship had been, he realised they had just won a battle while potentially losing the war. The celebration around him felt hollow. Bismarck was gone, but the real fight, the one that would determine Britain's survival, was just beginning beneath the Atlantic's cold surface. That realization, that moment of understanding what they had actually accomplished, stayed with every officer who had been part of the hunt. They had destroyed the enemy's battleship. In doing so, they had forced that enemy toward the one weapon Britain couldn't effectively counter. The victory tasted like ashes, and the Battle of the Atlantic raged for 2 more years, claiming victims by the thousands, proving that sometimes winning the fight in front of you means losing the war you didn't see coming.